They reached the creek that ran along his property. It was the only section of his land that had rows of trees on it. The rest of the place was mostly prairie grass, though he did have 4 trees spread around his house. He found a bunch of yellow flowers grouped together close to the creek, so he gathered a couple of them and brought them to her. A smile crossed her face as she took them. "Is this your way of making me feel better?" No, it hadn't been. He just wanted to show her that he had yellow flowers nearby. He planted some close to his house, too. He didn't plant them near her home. There was no sense in making her too comfortable there. If he did that, she might never think of his house as hers. "Thank you," she said. She sat next to the creek and put the flowers on the ground next to her so that she could wash her hands. He settled next to her and also washed his hands. Deciding to press his luck, he inched toward her, trying to be subtle about it so she wouldn't notice. When she finished and sat back, he joined her in the grass, happily noting that they were just a couple of inches from touching. He liked this, just sitting next to her and enjoying the late morning under the shade of the tree. He wished they could stay there forever, without anyone or anything coming between them. She collected the flowers and placed them on her lap. "How many days do you think it'll take to paint the rooms?" Since he could now count to 10, he held up 7 fingers. "A full week," she sighed. "I guess that's right. At least if you want to do a good job. But for some reason, I thought it'd go faster than that." He shook his head and grinned at her. "I know. I need more patience. Things worth doing shouldn't be rushed. Didn't anyone ever tell you that redheads have a terrible time waiting?" She had to be kidding. She had no trouble waiting to marry him. His gaze shifted to her hands. It was hard to judge the size of her ring finger from looking at it. He reached forward and touched her hand. "John!" He recognized the warning in her voice, so he quickly plucked a nearby white flower with his free hand and held it in front of her. She didn't look convinced that his actions were innocent, but he pressed forward and opened the palm of her hand so it was facing up. He placed the white flower in it and collected 2 of the yellow flowers and put 1 on each side of the white flower. As he smoothed the flowers out, he took one of the petals and wrapped it around her finger. "What are you doing?" she asked. She didn't sound annoyed, though there was a hint of hesitation in her voice. He rubbed his fingernail against the part of the petal that marked the width of her finger. Then he glanced around for distraction. Finding the squirrel sniffing around the tree across from them, he nodded toward it. "Success." She looked at the critter. "Well, what is it?" He yanked the petal from the flower and let her hand go. "Well, I don't understand. What is so important about the squirrel?" He shrugged as he slipped the petal into his pocket. "Sometimes I don't know what to do about you." Holding his hand up, he pointed to his ring finger. She shook her head and rolled her eyes. "When are you going to give up?" He noted a hint of amusement in her tone, instead of the usual exasperation, so he decided to press his luck. Wrapping his arms around her, he knocked her over so that they both landed on the grass. After a startled shriek, she wiggled so that she could face him. He held on to her and threw his leg over hers before she could get up. "Well, too bad those people in town can't see you now. Just look at the way you take advantage of a poor, unsuspecting woman." Shrugging, he gave her a wicked smile and kissed her cheek. "Oh, John, you can't be serious." Despite her attempt to look stern, she also laughed. "Well, you're not playing fair. You know I'm not strong enough to get away." He raised an eyebrow. She wasn't even trying to get away from him. That meant there was hope, right? Even if she protested, she seemed to be enjoying it. Noticing that a strand of her hair was close to her eyes, he reached up and brushed it away. Noting the softness of her skin, he let his fingers linger at her cheek. "Well, I never met anyone more determined than you. You're much too stubborn for your own good." It was true, so he didn't deny it. Instead, he let his fingers drift to her pink lips. He'd never kissed a woman before, but he'd seen other men do it. It looked simple enough. And if it was so simple, why did he suddenly worry that he couldn't do it right? She wasn't fighting him. In fact, her hand stayed on his arms. It was a very pleasant feeling. one he wanted to enjoy forever if she'd let him. He closed his eyes and kissed her. His movement was stiff. He knew it was. But he didn't know how to relax when his heart was beating frantically against his chest. But he liked the kiss, so he leaned forward for another one. Her lips were warm against his, and she returned his kiss, almost seeming hesitant, but still willing. He let his lips linger on hers, never wanting to leave the sweet bit of heaven he'd suddenly discovered. He thought he might like to kiss a woman some day, but he had no idea just how much he'd like it. This, he decided, was the most wonderful experience he'd ever had. Reluctant, he pulled away from her. His gaze met hers, and he sensed the uncertainty in her eyes. He pointed to his temple. "What am I thinking?" she softly asked. He nodded. She took a moment before she responded. "I'm thinking that we should get back to painting the house."